Okay, we're going to switch it up a little bit this morning. I'm going to disappear for about 40 minutes or so. Jamie is not here today, so I am going to, Don is actually going to kick things off for us. I am going to be with the 5 to some odd year olds. It's my turn. So I'll be there, so I'll be back in a little bit. Before we do get started, I do want to let everyone know that it is January. Happy New Year. We are getting ready to start looking at nominations for the board relatively soon. So if you are interested, please talk to one or all of us. Some of us are probably looking at stepping down. So we are definitely looking at volunteers that are willing and have time. So with that, Don.
Welcome. I know we have a couple of new people here, or maybe several. Can you see who the new people are? All right. Well, thank you. We're very welcome, and we hope that maybe you'll join us and even become members as time goes on. It turns out it's a pretty easy thing to do. You go to our website, fofd.org, and there's a membership form there, just a real simple one, mostly contact information. Just fill it out and turn it in to any of the folks on the board you see walking around here. And next board meeting, we vote you in. So, I guess since everyone is here, you probably all did survive the Mayan apocalypse. You know, today is our first gathering in 2013, and as we begin the new year, we're reminded of a lot of really neat things that happened last year. We welcomed a lot of new faces into our membership, and we lost a few, some of them due to job transfers and things. We've helped each other through some pretty amazing times this past year, and through some kind of rough times too. Our groups swelled to over 1,100 members at this point throughout the whole Metroplex, and in a few cases throughout the whole country, and in a couple cases throughout the world. Now, one of the things that we did this year was to try and get more feedback from all you folks on the topics that you found interesting, so we could incorporate those into our meetings more frequently. And the topics that showed up most on the request cards were neuroscience and how our brains work and having more guest speakers. Well, today we're going to do all three of those things. Our guest this morning is Lydia Allen, and she completed her undergraduate degrees in psychology from Texas A&M, philosophy from UT Austin, and then she went on and got a master's degree in biotechnology with an emphasis on neurobiology at Columbia University in New York City. And she completed her master's thesis in the lab of Nobel laureate Eric Kandel. She's completing a second master's in the history of ideas at the University of Texas in Dallas. And she also works there as a teacher's assistant in philosophy of science and technology. And her scholarly interests include philosophy of neuroscience and science policy formation in the United States. In other words, the culture wars that result from that. She's also a research associate with UTD's Center for Values in Medicine, Science, and Technology. Wow. Psychology, philosophy, neurobiology and biotech, history of ideas, philosophy of science and technology, values in medicine, science, and technology. This sounds like somebody I want to hear from. She's going to be speaking to us in three parts today, and the first part, she's going to talk to us about the neuroscience of perception and the link to rationalism and empiricism. Please welcome Lydia Allen.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Donna. I greatly appreciate it. And thank you all for having me here today. One of my great passions in life is to talk about science and how it relates to philosophy, so that I get to do it this morning with you all is a great pleasure for me, so I really, really appreciate being here. As he mentioned, I'm going to really talk about a couple of things today. I'm not going to just talk about neuroscience. I'm also going to talk about how it relates to sort of philosophical concerns that we have, particularly about how we form knowledge as it relates to our senses. So with that, I'm going to open the talk on, I'm going to focus on visual perception. And we're going to talk a bit about optical illusions and why that's a problem for knowledge, and then we'll finish up the talk with a couple of different philosophical positions on knowledge formation as it relates to sense perception. So if you will direct your attention to this first slide. This is a picture of our retinas. What's interesting about our retinas is that light actually comes in this direction, this way. And so, although these are the rods and the cones at the top, those are the last cells that the light actually hits when it comes into your retina. Rods and cones operate differently in that rods perceive mostly black and white, and cones perceive color. And there are particular pigments that are excited by light. Rhodopsin, for instance, is the color yellow. And so from the very beginning, we began to have a philosophical question about how we perceive our world. Because actually what we're seeing, is it really yellow, really? Or is it, how our body interprets, a certain wavelength of light? Okay, I'm going to get into a little more about where the image goes from your retina. Interestingly enough, inside your eye, you actually have two fields of vision, your external field and your internal field. And both of these fields of vision will cross your optic chiasm here. So if you're looking at the picture, again, if I have to walk away from the mic, I'll try to speak up. But if you're looking at the picture here, you can see that this side of your eye goes to this side of your brain. This side of your eye goes to that side of your brain. It's an interesting feature of binocular vision. And again, binocular vision itself is going to present some interestingly philosophical stuff when we talk about particular optical illusions that arise due to binocular vision. Once the image passes the optic chiasm, it will go through the lateral geniculate nucleus of the thalamus. And the thalamus is kind of the relay station inside your brain that will take your sensory input from all kinds of other sense organs, and it will relay it to various parts of your cortex. In the case of vision, it gets relayed to the visual cortex, which we have here, is in the back of your brain. As you can see, this part here. It's very complex. You have multiple visual cortices that are shown in the picture there. And then in this picture over here, you can see how it radiates into that part of your brain. So the visual cortex isn't just sort of this basic part here. It actually radiates forwards, and there are also interconnections between your visual cortex and your temporal cortex, which is where your auditory systems are located. So an odd feature of that is that we tend to think of dyslexia, for instance, as a visually processing issue, but it also is a sound processing issue, which is why sometimes people tend to visually mix up sounds that are similar, like D's and T's. So the takeaway point from that is that our brains are very interconnected. Just to give you an idea of the real complexity of the visual system, this is a slide showing sort of a coronal cut of your brain. And you can see from the many colored sections there of the visual cortex that a lot of processing is going on. One interesting book that I read by Richard Powers, who's actually won the National Book Award for this book, is about a guy who he's involved in a car accident. And after the car accident, a particular part of his brain is damaged, and he gets what's called Capgras syndrome. So he's able to visually recognize things that are familiar to him, his sister, his home, his dog, but he cannot emotionally recognize those things. And so he begins to believe that he's living in a world where everything is an imposter. It's a fake house, a fake dog, a fake sister. In any case, it again brings home the point that there's lots and lots of interconnection and complexity to our sensory processing and what it tells us about the world around us. So for those of us who don't suffer from that particular disorder, you know, we know that those that we recognize are really the person that they are. For him, they couldn't be. And that book is mentioned here at the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to get into some ways that our sensory systems fool us. And the now classic grumpy cat, eye bleeding optical illusion. It works because it plays with the cells in your retina. There is, if you will, a bleed, and I don't mean like, my retinas are bleeding, although we feel like that. There's a bleed that happens between black and white because your cones can only sustain light stimulation for so long. The particular pigments in the cell begin to be degraded after a very short amount of time, and this is one of the ways that vision works. Think about it. If we produced or excited permanently our pigments in our eyes, then we would eventually have fade out and we wouldn't be able to see anything. So a lot of what we see depends on the ability to switch it off once we've seen it, and that is how this particular optical illusion works. Once we sort of have actually seen and begin to conceptualize what we see, we begin to have optical illusions sort of in the more cortical part of our brain. This particular optical illusion works because we can't decide which is the face of the cube, right? This could be the face, right? Or this up here could be the face of the cube. So again, there's a conceptual illusion that goes on. Another conceptual illusion, do you see two faces or a vase? This is a really classic optical illusion, so you guys have probably seen this before. Obviously, the vase is in the middle, the two faces are on the side. Salvador Dali gets a lot of his work out of questions that were being raised at that time about knowledge and its relation to our senses, because this was a philosophical debate that was happening at the time that he was painting. And so I feel like this picture that he does here is a really good example, again, of illusion, because we don't know if it's a tree, if it's a person, because there are features that are similar between the two. And in the very background, it might be hard to see, but there's also a volcano, which I think is pretty cool. And all of them look like people.